Okay guys, I know what you're going to say. I was supposed to do the new Telsto build next, I know, but I just couldn't wait to show you this Lightning Wave Hunter build. I am currently 23 power level under in all the gameplay you're watching, and in a second here you will see me work my way through a lost sector on the Pale Heart. And just watch how I don't even care how many enemies are around me, where I am positioned, or even if there is a champion staring at me. I can just run around without a care in the world, sending out endless lightning waves that jolt everything in a room at once thanks to how we have the build set up. And with the newly added bolt charge, we can build the stacks we need for it so frickin' fast, and just let them rain down on the higher health targets that survive the lightning wave and the jolting effect. We also add in ionic traces left and right from multiple sources, and the blinding debuff from a few different ways, to add to the overall offensive power of this lightning wave hunter. But power is not the only thing this build provides. As you can see, we have a ton of stacking damage resistance that allows us to run around freely. We have the buff to Amplified that makes it harder for enemies to even hit us. And to top it off, we actually have pretty good healing thanks to two different sources. Oh, and as you've probably noticed, we make so many orbs of power, and we get our Gathering Storm super in 30 to 45 seconds. So I can basically throw it at every champion in each room that we come across, and even the two overload champions I come up against here in a minute. What makes this entire build go is the melee ability Tempest Strike. This aspect on the Arc Hunter has probably been buffed 3 or 4 seasons in a row, and that's including adding extra damage each season, and also making the lightning wave reach further, and all you have to do is slide and activate your charged melee ability to let this thing out. It'll jolt all the targets that it hits, and another thing that was added this season was defeating jolted targets grants a stack of bolt charge. And even though Tempest Strike does really good damage now, I think this season it received close to a 60% damage buff. But the real catalyst for this build is defeating jolted targets. As you can see in the left hand side, we stack bolt charge so fast. Sometimes you'll see it jump up 4 or 5 in a single instance. And that's because everything on the battlefield is jolted, and we have ways to make this happen. Make sure you take Gambler's Dodge, so when you dodge near an enemy, you do get your melee refunded. Now for the second aspect on the build, we'll add in Flow State. Defeating a jolted target makes you Amplified. Amplified got its nice buff this season, 15% damage reduction up all the time as long as you have Amplified up, and it makes it so targets have a harder time of hitting you. And while we have Flow State on, our dodge recharges so fast, and that's why we take it. For fragments, we'll add in Spark of Frequency. While Amplified, melee hits increase your equipped weapon's reload speed and stability, and then while Amplified, the effects are increased and you gain increased stacks of bolt charge from all sources. This is how we jump up 4 or 5 bolt charges instantly, because we're defeating jolted targets or grabbing ionic traces. And speaking of those ionic traces, we add in Spark of Discharge. Arc Weapon Final Blows have a chance to create an ionic trace, and then collecting an ionic trace grants you a stack of bolt charge. Those are the two main ways we're getting bolt charge: defeating a jolted enemy and picking up an ionic trace. We'll add in Spark of Resistance. While surrounded by combatants, you are more resistant to incoming damage. This is a 25% damage reduction. And since we're so close to enemies all the time, as you see in the gameplay, this is always up. So 25% damage reduction here, and 15% damage reduction from Amplified. And you're harder to hit, but we'll add another 50% damage reduction on top of this. And then for the last fragment, we'll take Spark of Beacons. While you are Amplified, your Arc Special or Heavy Weapon Final Blows create a blinding explosion. You can take whatever grenade you want with the build. I do like Flashbang Grenade, it's just another source of blinding and crowd control. And then Gathering Storm is the best super for what we're doing. The reason for this is it's a long range super or a close range, whatever you prefer, and it will jolt every nearby target that's in its range. Again, if you throw this on a champion and it's jolting enemies around it and killing it, that builds your bolt charge, and this can call down the Thunder Lightning bolt charge on its own. So essentially, Gathering Storm just got stronger thanks to bolt charge. Now our two exotics that we're pairing with this build help so much. First off is our chess piece, and that is Gifted Conviction. This states activating Tempest Strike throws a bouncing explosive at nearby targets that jolts and damage them. The damage really isn't that great, but it is 3 or 4 bouncing round balls that will jolt targets that kind of are out to the left or right of your Tempest Strike. This allows just more jolting of overall enemies, but the second part here is jolting nearby targets grants you damage resistance. This damage resistance is actually really high. At ×3 or ×4 resist, you're getting 50% damage reduction. And since we have so many ways of applying Jolt, you're going to have that ×3 or ×4 resist up all the time. This is how we're running around like crazy in here. That's a 50% damage reduction like I just said, 25% coming from Spark of Resistance, 15% coming from Amplified, and you're harder to hit from enemies. So at base, you're very high up in damage resistance, which means we only need to add a few sources for healing to keep us topped off. For the exotic weapon I chose to use was Delicate Tomb. The reason for this is collecting Ionic Trace overcharges the weapon's next shot, and that allows it to jolt targets on hit. This is just another source to apply Jolt. You could trade this out for something like Indebted Kindness, if you want to use the rocket sidearm, right? There's a lot of options here. But Delicate Tomb did get a nice buff this season. That Tempest Cascade shot hits like 100% harder this season was a nice buff that it received. And since we are grabbing Ionic Traces very often, you'll have that up a lot to do that extra damage. And Fusion Rifles in general, I think got a 30% damage buff. So Fusion Rifles actually feel really good. I think in a lot of the gameplay, I even run Scatter Signal as my Fusion Rifle in my primary slot, since the jolting and my melee and everything else is really killing everything. Now let's talk about the artifact mods really quickly. I like to pair Unraveling Orbs and Horde Shuttle with this. This just means when we grab those Orbs of Power, we can shoot one shot of our Strand weapon to apply the Unravel debuff, and just go back to town using our abilities. And this just spreads Unravel throughout the entire battlefield, and it just allows extra damage to be done to everybody. You also want to take Dielectric. This one's really nice this season. When you defeat arc debuff targets, it grants you Bolt Charge. And as you can see, everything is jolted or blinded with this build, so we're proccing that. And then when you have your Tome of Want boosted, right? The second part here for that boost is rapidly defeating arc debuff targets spawns an Orb of Power and heals you for a small portion of health. This is very nice, because we rapidly defeat enemies like crazy with this build, and that's the extra Orb of Powers you see popping up and extra healing on top of our healing from our mods. You also want to make sure you take Flashover. When you gain maximum Bolt Charge, you also become Amplified. We don't really need that part, but the second part here is Lightning Bolts deal more damage. All of our Lightning Bolts from Bolt Charge just hits basically twice as hard now. Now for the mods on the build, I will say some of these are pretty important, so make sure to slot them in. On the helmet, of course, Harmonic Siphon to spawn Orbs of Power on those arc weapon kills. But next we have Dynamo and Hands-On. We get extra super energy when we dodge near an enemy, and extra super energy when we defeat somebody with our melee ability. As you can see, we're always throwing out Tempest Strike, and we're always dodging, so we're proccing both of these all the time. On our gauntlets, we'll take Heavy Handed. That Tempest Strike now spawns Orb of Power, and then Focusing Strike and Impact Induction. This just means we get class ability energy and grenade energy every time Tempest Strike hits something, and that's very often. On the chest piece, take extra damage resistance. In the gameplay you see, I have an arc, a solar, and a void resistance on. Those just give you an extra 15% damage resistance to stack on top of everything else we're already doing. On the boots, we'll take Insulation and Absolution. When we pick up those Orbs of Power, we just get ability energy to all three of our abilities with Absolution, and we also get class ability from Insulation. You also do want to take Recuperation here, replenish health each time you pick up an Orb of Power. This is 70 HP. As you can see, we spawn so many Orbs of Power that you're activating this a lot. And since we have so much damage resistance, you don't need much healing, and this one mod alone will keep you topped off easy. On your class item, we'll pair this with Powerful Attraction. It automatically collects those nearby Orbs of Power when you activate your class ability. This just feeds the ability loop and adds healing every time you're dodging. We'll take a Reaper, so when we kill something with Delicate Tomb after we dodge, that spawns another Orb of Power. And I took a Utility Kickstart here as well. Since we are grabbing so many Orbs of Power really quickly, you'll have your armor charge up a lot, and every time you dodge, you get about 30% to 35% of your class ability back instantly. Now our dodge already comes back really quickly with Flow State, but this is just nice quality of life to make sure I have it up more often. You could drop this for like Special Finisher, or maybe go a different route with your mod and armor charges, but the way I was playing the build, this just felt right. It just gave me my dodge back basically, 5 to 7 seconds quicker, and that made a big difference for me. For stats on the build, make sure to aim for 100 resilience. Again, that is 30% more damage reduction on top of everything we already went over for damage reduction. And then just push your discipline up. And of course, hunters, you would want mobility. When you are amplified, you get extra mobility, so I wouldn't worry too much about mobility. So just make sure to get that resilience. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you found it helpful. And this is some of the most fun I've had on an Arc Hunter in a long time. I'll see you guys all in the next video. Have a great rest of your day.